who here has been involved with a custom bench at Olin? You. Sue, what have you built over the years? How many?
Oh, lots.
Lots.
You're doing one that's around 8 now. Less successfully using Blackwell as
Line
edge. One of the first ones I was involved in was another square bench. Born when I did that. And launching both and also a series of freestanding benches that we designed.
Well, I know you worked on Apple in the beginning, some of the earlier mock-ups.
Yeah, a lot of those.
Still changing. So custom benches and furnishings is something that Olin has always been involved with in the last 30, 40 years. And a few years ago, Laurie sat down and just started listing how many benches have we done. And she started writing out the project, doodling every profile, and he hit 32 and realized that we needed to actually start recording this information. And so, was this you, Will, that you helped put this together with Bonnie?
Katie and a lot of other people.
Yeah. So, and this is on the knowledge base. We've pulled all the details and profiles of a number of benches. I think this is somewhere around in the 30s, but all shapes and sizes, freestanding, backs, without backs, double wide, attached to walls, all sorts of varieties that I'll kind of explain, a little bit of history, pick a few benches. Not all of them is going to get their photo in this, it's just too many. But I'm going to explain kind of the process that's involved for custom furnishings, who to coordinate with, when to do mock-ups within each phase, and then some lessons learned that I've learned and others in the office have learned through some of our installations. So why do we do custom furnishings? And why not just pull up this lovely catalog I saw up front yesterday, Street Life, to Miss Laurie Olin, where it seems like there's every custom type of bench you could get. It's all off the shelf, but it seems a little fake, I'm a little curious about it because everything's photoshopped into some other landscape. But we do go off the shelf quite a bit for a lot of our furnishings. It's easy to go to landscape forums, select a bench, and they have all sorts of varieties and styles, and a lot of times this is good. This is what they do. They deal with this every day. They know how to work with all these materials, and they're continuing to update it. And they all have their place. So So this is at Comcast. So they have their place in the landscape. It's an off-the-shelf item, and a lot of times it depends on the client and the project. When you need to do a lot of benches, you can't do them all custom. It's just that the cost is too prohibitive. And a lot of times if you work with universities, they're all going to have their standards a lot of times ahead of time, or you help develop that standard with them through a master plan and guidelines. But sometimes you need your furnishings to form space, like a park, or it's more central to the space, like a PAFA. They can be security elements. Sometimes we need them to hide big, ugly utilities. There are accent lighting in our landscape. And there's a lot of different materials that we've used over the years. There's stone. We've used architectural precast concrete at Celebrezzi. It's all prefab in the shop and brought out. Wood, called a circle, steel, glass, and acrylics as well, the bubble bench, Kamana Bay. And we've even done recycled materials for growing minds out of pallets that we put together in the basement here at the Public Ledger Building. We've also designed trash receptacles. I don't know if this one is still around. It used to live right outside this door, and it was a big sign not to put trash in it.
That was their zombie thing.
Yeah. That was a mission day. We're working with Landscape Forms right now at Apple to develop a trash receptacle that's going to be used on the campus. So we're still playing around with trash cans that are custom. Drain grates, got an example here. Is that LDS, right? We did area grates, drain grates, and trench grates. And you can still get this on the catalog, Urban Accessories. It's got a tag OP, Full Partnership CD, OP First Basin. So we can still use this. It's an odd dimension too. It's like 7 inches or something like that. It's a tough one to work into some paving patterns I've found. And tables, like the grande cheese, that Sue's working on now with Michael to develop this tabletop that's also a fountain, and it drops off into a basin. And then there are all these little tables that connect to it at the end that can then be spread out across the courtyard and used on a daily basis from the 2 to 4 person tables, but then it can be all gang together on this fountain table to get the whole company together to have a big event. So not every project can do this, and for a number of reasons. The client sometimes doesn't want to deal with it. It's a lot of headaches. They're customized. Some of them have strict maintenance requirements that are needed. Budget, both for the construction budget, they can be very expensive. I think the one at Museum of Jewish Heritage was $1,000 for every foot in length, which was kind of how it averaged out. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense from that standpoint, and also costs us a lot of money. It takes a lot of work to do these custom benches and to design them structurally and fabricate them and to go through all these various mock-ups. And then scheduled. So a lot of times there are lead times to procure the materials, especially some of the woods, FSC certified products. And construction, they are very tedious and require some specialties. So the process, try to break it out for each kind of phase of work. So in concept, you're coming up with the flashy graphics, you've got the idea, you're making the client love it because they're the ones that need to say that they're going to pay for this throughout the project. So get their buy-in early, get them excited. Schematic drawings, you kind of start to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts because you need to provide a drawing for pricing. So you need to get a rough cost established early on. Through design development, you're making all the little tweaks to the nosings, to the profile, to the scale, do mock-ups at full size, sit on it. And then CDs, you're doing a lot of coordination with consultants and finalizing your details and tightening up your specs. In CA, you'll get sample submittals, which is what these are here. We require representative samples of wooden slats to be sent for review and approval and markups. You'll get shop drawings, basically your drawings sent back to you for review to make sure they've worked out all the details, and then you'll be monitoring the installation. So concept phase. These are some early sketches pulled from Laurie. This is Washington Monument Bench, Wagner Park. Kind of worked out a lot of the details with some of these drawings for the straps and kind of developed the overall profile and then worked out some of the nuts and bolts. And then this is Yale Hewitt Quad, which is a stone bench that had a lot of curves and twists, and there's a big sculpture. Kamana Bay, so this is the bubble bench, one of the earlier renderings. You guys are going to see some nice stylish graphics here, some of these early days. Columbus Circle, some of the original sketches there. The nosing was quite different in that section. For Museum of Jewish Heritage, I'm not sure who did these, if this was Howard that did these sketches. But this was him kind of storyboarding the front entrance and how to deal with security to make it look like it wasn't security. Instead of putting a string of bollards, we wanted to create furnishings that would allow for that barrier to occur. And this is an early rendering of MGH on the back side, the water side of the museum, of the central sphere. And sometimes we design benches that never get built. So this is a concept at Berkeley that went through a number of iterations. Jesse Forrester was working on this and was really trying to work out the gears assembly to make this move and be flexible and not kill somebody and pinch them in the swing, and working out the wheels. And this one, for cost reasons, just didn't make the cut. The ribbon bench at Canal Park, the early sketches. I think Katie Martin was doing these. And at Memphis Plaza, PAFA, there was an idea to have this billboard, this kind of LED display that didn't make the cut, but the overall bench did. And this is an example of a schematic design drawing that Bob Bedell, God bless him, sat down one day and drew this, half scale, and figured out, took that earlier rendering of what the bench was, and we had other sketches and renderings, and he figured out every angle and worked out how to put this thing together. And it pretty much resembled that toward the end. This one was, a T-post with a leveling bed, so that was your structure that then you ran all the angles off of these, and they were regularly spaced because they were a security element in the plaza, and you could tie in your glass on either side or the stone on the back side. And it also needed to be accessible because at this time they had light fixtures at the base, and eventually it moved up to the top underneath the bench coping, so you didn't see the source. In design development, we're constantly refining and tweaking. This is for Apple. Laurie was drawing over a full-size printout and kind of working out all the curves and getting the slats right and the angles right, and then drawing multiple versions of a freestanding bench just to get the legs right. He was kind of fiddling around with what the legs should look like and how they should be supported. We did a number of full-size mock-ups out of foam, a cheaper material that can be routed, for people to sit in and test the, and all these were little different heights and different widths and little different curves. We couldn't even tell them apart. It was really hard. But actually, when you sat down in it, you could really feel which one was the right one. But if you lined them all up together, it was really hard to be able to label them all. That's Sarah kind of testing we wanted the right arm height, shoulder height for the back of the bench. Did also the core benches, or these other freestanding stone benches that we also cut out of foam, had milled. And then this is one of the actual stone was the next step to build it out of the block. This was we did a diagram of how the conduit would come in, and they actually milled it, which doesn't really work, to get the lighting conduit into the light strip that's underneath the bench. And then sometimes your mock-ups can be really crude and out of just found materials. Agnes put this together today. You can use foam core and books and cardboard to just test it out to make sure. And you found out that it was too short. Too short. What was the right height? Do you remember?
Well, it's pretty good. It was 16 inches.
16. You can build them out of foam and T-pins and pin it all together and put a piece of paper over it and actually sit on it. A lot of times on projects you'll see them sitting out in the hallways, and people can walk by and sit on it, test it out. What do you think? How is it right? Because everybody's different scale, size, height. Maybe comfortable for Laurie, but he's taller than most people. And then this is a Columbus Circle mock-up where they actually did a piece out of the wood to kind of test it. A lot of times it's a good dry run for the fabricator as well to test out the constraints with the wood and what they can do and can't do. Sometimes the mock-ups can be little tiny 3D printed models. This is the only, I guess, left piece that still survives. That's at Greg's desk and it's falling apart. Be careful, you can mess around with it. And this was Hopkins, right? And can you talk a little about that one too? Like, what was the purpose of this study? Because it was a double-sided issue and there was 8
double-sided bench. Then there's an upper terrace and a lower terrace. And to get both the size of it and understanding the height of it so it will be safe and how to kind of transition into the end. I don't know, it's kind of evolved with both terrace. It's adjacent to the little Prince Garden, which is a quite versatile children's garden. We also wanted the bench to be somewhat whimsical. Just as a after installation, the chief architect for the campus decided to walk up the top of the bench. They decided they needed to put a rail on it, but they did, and it turned out all right. And we had made the bottom big enough to put a big planter on it, which they do to keep on planting. I don't know, Greg, you hear me now?
This was I guess I would say that this was a bench that got fabricated by hand and didn't get fabricated through the CNC process. So it was interesting because it was kind of amorphous and there was a lot of hand finishing in the field.
How did you document that?
Jim on the
every piece we drew.
We modeled it, Ari, and we did hand over a model to them, and during the shop drawing process, we went through kind of a super review of overlaying two models to confirm. But they didn't CNC it, they did it on my hand. So they then took a piece drawing and did it for piece drawing. It was a little, it wasn't the smoothest process, and we learned from it. Especially doing CNC. Yeah. I would say that without getting too much into a rabbit hole, the interesting thing is that that's a masonry bench, and a lot of the curves and radii and bulldozers got done in the shop. But when it had to be worked in the field, that meant that not a standard mason could work on it. Right. So they basically have the guy from the granite shop that finishes the pieces come out to the site, and he was there for like 3 days working the whole thing.
For the Museum of Jewish Heritage, we had a number of mock-ups, but they were, it was kind of a combined, what's the feel of the top and the coping and the seating, but also the lighting was such a strong component of the design that we had a series of mock-ups. We were, the one on the right was within the lighting designer studio, and then we carried it up to his rooftop and did some lighting studies at night. There we were also playing with a lot of different types of glass, working with Joel Berman Glass Studios out of Canada. We were toying around with fused glass strips to get this kind of texture that we were looking for. And he played around with glass for about a year to try to get it right, and we ended up just going to cast glass. We finally got one piece right, and then we just cast it. Because this just kept breaking. He would just send us samples that would just show up and shatter pieces, and it would always break apart. In the sunlight and condensation, everything would just pop. We also played around with some dichroic glass in this as well, which is what Comcast used in the trellis, to play around with different light effects. And then the bubble bench, this is the full-size mock-up that was sent to us in our studio and was here for a bit. Is Richard here? No. This was Richard's baby for many years. And he developed this bubble system that has a couple different lenses and these cylinders that hold the little bubble balls together, and then the light has a diffuser at the bottom, and he's got a whole manual. He can talk to you for days about this if you want to learn more. But this is roughly how it goes together with the 3D model. you have the concrete footing, and then the little L brackets clip together. You've got the diffuser plate and the frame, and then the little cylinders with the bolts, and then the overall cover. And he was telling me that they even had to fill the bench with a gas because there would be condensation built up in between the lenses. So there was a final step before you fuse it all together to pump it full of something. This is an early rendering of the Columbus Circle bench, doing a lot of 3D models. So you can do, you know, a lot of times we do 3D digital models for fabrication as well. Some of these were actually graphics we did after the fact. I think this was one of the first ones Chris Landau worked on for these effects for MJH because we were putting it into a submission for ASLA. So this is actually after just us documenting it. And all the layers that came together for that bench, the structural support, and then all the little different frames and clips and things to hold all the glass together, and then the LED fixtures within the top.
Now you know why people want to come or off the shelf.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah. And PAPA as well had its series of complicated details, which I've got some installation photos of this one going in. So when you're in DD, you want to start coordination. You want to talk to the architects about what wood that they're using on their building. Like Grande, we ended up using the same, the Grappa. And finishes, you want to coordinate that so it fits in with the site. And then also talk to the architect about if you have landscape over structure and you've got a bench that's over structure, make sure your footings could be tying into their structure, waterproofing, and get all that worked out early on. You'll need to bring structural on board to help you with the footings, the anchors, welds. You want to make sure this thing's engineered. They are pretty massive structures a lot of times, and these things are not light. Hardwood is very heavy. Lighting, you'll need sometimes we always plug in lights, so you'll need a lighting designer to help you select that fixture, and then coordinate with electrical because you've got to get the conduit in there, you don't want to see it. There's junction boxes where the electrical is bringing power up to a certain point. You want to make sure that that's away from the bench. You don't want to have a box right next to your feet. So this is an example of a construction document sheet set. There's two sheets that I'll show you. So this is for Wishart. We start out with the kind of typical section at the top of each profile. We had a 3D kind of axon to help explain the profile and how the bench came together. This was a layout for all the steel. This was a layout for all of the wood. And then each wood nosing piece profile, cutout radius, dimensions. And then the same for the other profile bench. We had the backed and we had a backless version. And then on the other sheet, this is where you kind of start to set the modules together. So we had the plan, elevation, we had a steel layout plan for each of those straps, what the spacing was, coordinated with the wood layout plan. And then the same for the other bench. We had footing layouts because we wanted to make sure that those were in the right spot because we wanted the wall to go underneath the bench and sit perfect. So we provided as much information as we could on these drawings.
It's also important to remember compatibility of materials, especially when you're using metal for metal fasteners.
Yes, like metals. This is an example of a structural drawing. We had a structural engineer for MJH who helped us identify all the fasteners, since this was a security element, identify all the welds, all the bolts, and we kind of shared a file. So we had our own landscape section that was exactly like this, but we were calling out other details. But we basically sent them our section and they populated it with their information. We had stepped conditions to deal with, grade changes, and how to work out the shoes that supported the glass. For specs, I'm just showing you a table of contents. So for NJH, we separated this out as a separate bid package. Basically, the concrete footings were put in with the rest of the park as a package, and since the design of it was taking a little bit longer, we pulled that out. So it was a separate bid, its own separate set of drawings and specs. So we had a custom site furnishing section which had talked about the wood and the lighting and coordination with all the other elements. We had a custom metal fabrication spec, waterproofing, joint sealants, and lighting as well. So there's a number of sections that all need to be coordinated with all these materials. And then for CA, these are an example of submittals. We received samples for Wishart, and this is our mock-up of what we reviewed. They had on profiles. They had laminated things, which we did not want laminated wood. And this is an example of a shop drawing that's required, and our spec for custom furnishings is very descriptive of what we're looking for. We want shop drawings that are completely coordinated, because what they'll try and do and send you is the steel guy will send you his shops, the wood guy will send you his shops, and then the lighting guy will send you, and then you're the one that has to put it all together and make sure it works out. And that's not what we want. We want them to work this out. So our specs are written so that the general contractor coordinates that with all the fabricators. It's a joint package of all the materials. They've overlaid all the information so that you know that it lines up. They did not get that on Wishart. We went through 5 rounds of reviews where we rejected it, revised and resubmit each time until we finally got to a point where we approved it for fabrication, and a lot of the details would be worked out in the mock-up review there. So don't feel like you are forced into accepting something that doesn't meet your spec. It's a contract, they need to do it. And their biggest problem was they didn't have a CAD guy to overlay everything, which is bullshit. So this is an example of the steel shop drawings that we marked up and sent back. Basically our drawings with all the dimensions and additional information, strap layout. Fabrication, a lot of times these are built in the shop. You've got greater control in the shop, less out on the site. So you want as much as you can built in the shop, and that is what our specifications require. For the bubble bench, this was all fabricated. Not sure where, but there was a specialist that kind of dealt with these acrylics and was able to form all of them. This is their construction documents of how it all went together, and here's the installation of it. So there's the diffuser plate. You've got the footing and the brackets, and then this is the frame that these kind of tighten into. Some are a little more complicated. This is MJH, where you can see how they had to do the paving around and leave out the area for all the field cuts later until they got the stainless steel chute set and the glass set right. And all the wood pieces were built in modules that could be lifted up and accessed. And those were the bolts that I don't think they ever did put the bolts in on this because they were so heavy that they really weren't worried about people coming by and picking them up. So we had to tell them to at least put insect screens in there because it was, the flight and bugs are getting in there.
That's one huge piece of glass because it looks like laminated. Glass.
It is laminated. It's, it's cast. Yeah, so we ended up going with cast. So it was 2 pieces laminated together. So you had the textured piece and the structural piece. And then the LED lights was all custom, fabricated and designed by our lighting engineer, and they were on a hinge so they could flip them up and maintain them. For PAFA, this is an early version of that, and this was a laminated piece, which I think these are all solid. They end up going with, and you can see that's about the same size. And I think that they had trouble getting FSC. I think they wanted locust. I think that's what they ended up going with. But all the pieces showed up on site individually. They couldn't build this in modules. So they set each pedestal column on its own, and then they ran a kind of a steel plate across to get the curve, and then they were hand setting each individually in the field with the spacers to get the curve right. And then we did the stages as well.
And I don't know if you're going to show this, but the end pieces were custom models and then CNC built.
Yeah, separately. You can see one example there. For Wishart, this is the steel fabricator developed these in his shop, and then he delivered them to the wood guy's shop to receive all the wood slats. So that's what the structural system looks like that sits on top of the concrete footing. And then this is the wood slats being installed in the shop. And so how this section was designed so the modules could just come out and set right on top of the concrete footing that's already in place with these anchor bolts on the sides. And you can see that we slotted the steel so that they could shim it up. And you can see all the shims at the top right that they use to set the elevation. And then they can go in and tighten up all the bolts. So you want to leave some flexibility with your design as well, because they're going to need it in the field, because they're working with a concrete contractor's tolerances, which aren't as tight as your bench. And then you can see the LED clips that were there to receive the light. And this is one example of, how to get conduits and electrical feeds and boxes up through the footing. They kind of install the conduit ahead of time, and they fed the lights later. You can see there's a little box in there that will never be accessible, I'm sure. Usually there's drivers that are required, especially for LED fixtures, that you need to find a hiding spot somewhere. And they generally don't need to access them as much, but this is only leaving a few inches for some guy to crawl under and install it. And MJH, we were able to hide all of our drivers below the coping as well. I think PAPA had a really nice detail on how they clipped their light in there. It's probably one of the better ones I've seen. Wishart, I don't know if you saw that, they use zip ties. Not our detail. And then you can see that this is where they screwed all of the fasteners below, so you didn't see any of the screws on the surface of the wood. Think about the details and how, we study a bench so much in sections. Sometimes we kind of lose sight of the end conditions and how you want the piece to end, and you don't want to see the structure, and you want this thing to just be floating. So I wish we had limestone blocks on some of them. And then our freestanding ones, we had a laminated piece of Ipe that was fastened on the backside, so to kind of cover the fasteners there. And again, the barns did a similar detail, but they didn't want to show the wood slats in profile. This is the Carnegie Hall. This is a good example of a wall-mounted type of installation where all the brackets are tied into the plenum wall. You can see it's very complicated. You got the deck and the stone veneer and the leave-out space for this bench to sit in there, and I think it's a very successful detail of how to do a nice, comfortable backed bench on a stone wall. You can do a lot with wood. You can curve it. For Federal Reserve Bank, Kansas City is one example. And I think they probably had to use steam to get it to bend right. And you need to understand thicknesses of the wood and what you can and can't do. Talk to, the wood suppliers, what the limitations are, understand those constraints. We also did the same at Director Park. Nice curved bench following the slats following that form. And then you can also do curves by running the slats in an alternate direction, perpendicular to the curve as well. And then you can go up and down, do all sorts of things with this. So this is the ribbon bench being installed. Columbus Circle did not, most of our benches we fastened from below, but they came in from the top, and this was a very nice detail. You can see all the joints lining up with the coping, and the spacings were perfect. But they came back in and plugged it with plugs as part of the finishing, so you don't see the screws.
Can I say something about this photo too?
Sure.
I don't know if this is the case, but I'm going to make up that this is the case of benches cannot span over extension joints. And so this
Why?
expansion joints in your slab, because the slab is moving and the bench is a very fixed object, so it's going to put stress on the bench when the slab moves. So this is a great photo because this would be a solution to having a bench that spans over, that feels like it spans over an expansion joint.
Yeah, if you were to line up your straps on either side and have it cantilever a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm pointing to specifically is that in the nosing, you have the sides are separated.
Right.
And you can coordinate that also with, like how you segment it and you create a bench. Height of
One comment on the spacing of the slats as well. I was always told to do the cigarette butt test of spacing because it is a real issue to have. If it's too wide, people stuffing trash in it and things like that. So you kind of want it to be tight enough to not have that happen. This is a great example of a custom bench that's coordinated with the paving. I mean, that joint is beautiful that they were able to line up the stone top with the paving.
That's the expansion joint?
That's
like the expansion joint.
And then Wagner Park had to deal with corners, and they chose to miter that and reflect it again in the paving pattern as well.
From the top there too.
Yeah.
Those plugs come out.
I hadn't. It's been a while since I've been there, but the last time I was there, it seemed to still be holding up really well.
I was there like 2 years ago, actually looking at the metal edging on the paving and everything, like the bench, the paving, drainage, everything.
Yeah.
Like really tough.
Yeah. Sometimes you can build little hatches and hide things. This is not our bench. I saw this at Chicago River Esplanade, where it was just this hidden. Yeah, it wasn't locked. It had a nice hairline joint, and I was just like, oh, that's a little piano hinge, and so there's a little. I couldn't open that, but I didn't know what was in there. So resources, there is some information on the knowledge base. I think we should continue to populate that and get some of our more recent benches added to this. I'm going to talk a little bit about landscape forms. So yeah, I think they were in here recently talking about their studio and what they can do. And they are a great resource as well. They've been fabricating benches for how many years. They understand what wood is readily available, what it can and can't do. They're very eager to work with us on projects and help us engineer some of these things. It's kind of tough. You need the right project and the right client to work with them because it doesn't allow for competitive bids. So you bring them on board, they've designed it for the project, and it's at their price. So it's just got to be the right fit, I think, a lot of times. Lessons learned. So there's a few benches that we've done over the years where things didn't work out the best way. This is laminated black locust at Canal Park. Essentially, the bench was glued in profile from one another and without wood fasteners. And this was maybe a year or two after it was built. It was not that old. And you're able to pick up some of these pieces. We were able to kind of stagger the joints in plan, but we probably should have done the same in elevation as well to lock it all together, because you get these big joints of big wood that's all warping and changing with the moisture content. And it's kind of going all sorts of different directions. And then especially with longer boards, once you get certain width, they can start to warp and turn and split. I think a lot of this was the wood itself as an experiment on our part with black locust. I think it has its part. I mean, I think the ribbon bench did well from its wood slats. If you get enough volume and keep the pieces shorter, you can probably use it. But Ipe seemed to be working out very well. It's still at Wagner Park. That was Ipe. And don't glue to steel. Use fasteners. It's going to hold up much better long term. So I didn't realize that Canal Park, they had the little dowels and they just epoxied them or something. Used some adhesive, I'm not sure, too. And I was able to just pick them up. Yeah, ribbon bench. This is at Wishart. You can see there's a large crack in the nosing. This had to do with moisture content of the wood escaping too rapidly. They installed this in winter, and it was a very dry environment, and so I think it was probably everything was fabricated in the shop in a controlled environment and brought out in winter, and the moisture just sucked right out of the wood. And so we started getting some big, long cracks. And what you need to make sure that you do in your specification is to, there's sealers to put on the ends of the wood, and that helps slow down the moisture that's escaping the wood. So it'll have more slower kind of acclimation to the environment that you're in. I know Takashi, he's not here, he knows quite a bit. He was dealing with that on the line dance. There is some information that I'm going to try and get on the knowledge base on moisture content, because it depends on the region as well. So you'll need to vary that within your spec.
It's like a paraffin line.
Yeah, yeah.
We've actually seen those checks appear, but then as the weather changes, they'll close back up.
Yeah, there are checks that we allow to happen at the surface, and you can see it at Wagner Park. You know, the wood kind of breathes, so it's kind of, especially with Ipe, you'll see little hairline cracks, but usually they're only like this long, and then they kind of seal back up. They kind of move up and down. But when you get cracks that are over a long span, then it's got a structural issue. And you can see it on the ends of the wood as well. You see it running all the way through the board, and you know that it's a board that shouldn't be used. From MJH, I realize that we can design these beautiful benches, but it's really how it's maintained. This is for Battery Park City. They do not have the manpower to be cleaning these things out. There was bugs, leaves, things were getting in there and building up, and the glass is dirty. There's cracked pieces that need to be replaced. The wood tops are very heavy. They're in like 3-foot and 6-foot segments, and it takes at least 2 or 3 guys to pick it up and lift it off in order to get in there. So they essentially don't go into them and fix things. That's it. Any questions? Agnes?
Regarding when you're in DD and you trust the housing construction engineers and the bench.
Yeah.
Well, what if you're in this situation where you sold the client a bench and they like it, and now you're in DD and the construction engineers look at it and he refuses because it's so far.
Yeah, it happens. You need to make it part of their scope. They're just looking for extra fee, or we find another third-party structural that will take a look at it for us and provide comment. And I think there's probably also ways to require through the shop drawing process that the contractor provides an engineering stamp, like they review it, and when they send you the steel structure, you have the steel structure have an engineer review it, and they can modify it. So there's probably ways to get the contractor to pay for it in the end, but you may not like what they come back with. They say you need to add extra steel straps and this, and it could be a redesign. So it's best to know before before you get that far. But it's tough because we go into projects and we define scope for consultants before we design anything, and a lot of times, we get these custom complicated pieces, and we just need to, when we sell it to the client, say this is going to be an additional service to this person, this person, this person to support that. It wasn't in our original idea for concept. Or you build it in early on, just make it part of the scope at the beginning.
And the architect, rather than
Right.
the architect.
Right.
What about the separate bid? How's that whole made?
That was really how the construction manager wanted to approach the project and the client. So for MJH, they wanted to get started and do the park, and we were still messing around with the bench for a longer time. The glass was still not figured out. It was a custom piece, so they chose to bid it separately for the park so that they could get started with the construction. We gave them the information for the footings, and we designed those footings. And it actually worked out well because they were able to give us as-builts for the footings for the curb pieces, so we can make sure that what we were drawing was matching up with what was poured in the field. All right. Thank you.